welcome to Spotlight on East Fishkill. I'm Councilman Nick D'Alessandro, and this is Councilman Tom Franco, and this is a special edition of Spotlight on East Fishkill. Today we are going to discuss
some of our favorite people in the town of East Fishkill, our American Legion people, our great veterans here. And today we have with us Jim Reynolds.
Hi.
Don Burns.
Hi.
Vinnie Richards.
Yeah.
And Owen Cottle. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us tonight.
Thanks for coming,
It's
guys.
an absolute honor.
So we were thinking that we could go around the table and discuss what the American Legion does in our town, and most people don't even know that you guys are even here. And since we started this Hometown Heroes program, there's been a lot of discussion about the American Legion, and maybe Don and Vinny or all of you could start and tell us a little bit about it.
Don, you're the president, so.
I'm the commander.
Commander.
The American Legion is a wartime veteran organization. It's 98 years old. It will soon have its 100th anniversary. In the same year, we will have our post-70th year anniversary. So we've been around since 1949. The post is Manny Bacon, post 1758 of the American Legion, and it is named after a citizen of East Fishkill who was killed in World War II, the first local citizen to die in World War II. And Charles Manny Bacon went to school here, I guess spent most of his life here, and met the call to go into the service in World War II, and so we named the post after him. Presently, we meet at the Old Town Hall, courtesy of the town allowing us to be there. We have about 100 members, and they range from Owen at World War II all the way up to people who are still in the reserves today. The requirement is that they have to had served active duty in wartime and had an honorable discharge. And the American Legion itself is founded on four pillars that we call them, and that is the things that the Legion believes in, and it is veteran, taking care of veterans, community, the children and youth, and Americanism, national security. And so we all volunteer. There's no salaries, and we work with the Boy Scouts through their venture crew, and we do work with the Eagle Scouts with their projects, and we also have a lot of community service we do where we take canned goods down to Castle Point to help out the veterans that are in need down there. We also have some of the Legion programs that we use, which is the oration contest for high school or any school kids to go from the local post level all the way up to national, and there's money available for scholarships. We also do Boys State and Girls State, which is a week-long program where the juniors of high school go off to college and they learn about how government works. They actually set up a town government and a city government and run for office. So it's all paid for by us collecting money and sending these kids at no cost to them. We also do a lot of work where in the past we've taken clothing down to Castle Point. We've taken shoes and collected coats and clothing for the pantry down there. And locally we do parades, of course. We do the flag ceremony on Flag Day where we retire flags, and try to work with the town as necessary for any kind of celebration that's going on. It's related to either country or veteran-oriented celebrations. And it's also our responsibility to take care of any veteran that has a funeral that wants to have an honor guard. And so we do all these things, and it's no cost to anybody.
Wow, you guys do an awful lot in the community, and we're really grateful for that. Since this Hometown Heroes project started, there has been a buzz, as Councilman D'Alessandro has said, and people have been asking questions. And it's great to have you guys here, and if you don't mind, we'd like to just ask you a little bit about yourselves. And you guys are all on the banners. Don, yours is coming really soon. Mr. Cottle, you are Owen, sir, you are a World War II veteran. And
Yes, sir.
It's an absolute honor to be sitting in the same room with you. Could you tell us a little bit, something about your time in service?
Sure. First of all, I was not a combat veteran. I had a relatively easy job. I was in the Army Air Corps.
Okay.
Went into the service in February of 1943 and got out in October 1945.
Wow.
Served in Europe, went to England first, then to France, then to Belgium, and then to Holland at different air bases maintained by the 9th Air Force. This was a Air Force that included the B-26 medium bombers and the P-51 fighters. I was in a B-26 group. My job was to load bombs in the airplanes every night, and we would get up at 2 o'clock in the morning, go out, the bombs would be sitting there at the airplane. There would be 2 of us on each airplane. We would load the bombs into the bomb bay and go to sleep then probably around 5 o'clock. Then when the airplanes came back that afternoon, our job then was to go clean the machine guns and fill the ammunition buckets again so that they'd be ready for the next day. And every day, of course, we sweated out who was going to come back, because we did lose airplanes. Nothing as serious as the 8th Air Force and their flying fortresses, but our airplanes, we did lose some, and I lost one of my crews. I'll never forget that day. It was a very sad day. That's pretty much it.
Well, out of all the places that you've been to during your tour, which was your favorite? Do you have an interesting story or something very?
I
something that
think
happened?
England was the place. Well, at least we knew the language there.
Yeah.
Right.
That helped. A lot of us learned some French, though. When you went to France, you had to in order to walk around and see things. It was a great. Both places were a great country to go see things that you had read about as a kid. In London, you saw the Parliament buildings and the London Bridge, and then you got over to France, and they did allow you to go into Paris once in a great while, and you see the Champs-Élysées and the Arc de Triomphe. Those are things that otherwise you probably wouldn't see in much of your lifetimes. Wow. So it was a great opportunity. There were some tough days. One I remember, I was only at the base as a replacement about 1 week when one morning there was a huge explosion right outside the barracks. What happened is 2 of our airplanes taking off, they clipped their wings, and one of them tried to get back to the base, and he made it, but he came in crashing. He was within 100 yards of our barracks.
Wow.
And the plane was on fire, and the fire department wouldn't go near it because they thought the bombs were still in the airplane. And they figured if the fire department got there and the thing blew up, you'd wipe out the fire department.
Right.
So they were not able, and I found out afterwards, though, the pilot had dropped the bombs, not ready to explode, in a field before he got there.
Oh,
wow.
That man
Quick thinking.
was a hero.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh my goodness.
That was I think the most dangerous situation I ever experienced over there.
Wow. And how did you find the people going to all these countries, Belgium, France, England, where they were happy to see the Americans?
They were delightful.
Right.
We made quite a few friends.
I'm sure.
I remember in Holland, there was a young fellow and his wife who owned a bar, and he had a little kid. and we would bring them chocolate, which all the kids over there loved. And we brought chocolate, and we had all the beer we could drink. It was a fun time.
It's a good trade.
Yeah. I even brought home a little wooden shoe from there that I still have.
That's great.
That's great.
Some of this is kind of memory, kind of things that you do remember that made the whole experience worthwhile.
Absolutely. And how about, I just have one other question. How many bombs would fit in the bomber?
Depending the size.
Okay.
I think we could put 2 1,000-pounders in, 4 500-pounders, 8 250-pounders, and I think it was about 16 100-pounders.
Wow.
So. The 100-pounders, they were fun because one guy on the ground could pick them up, hand them up to the guy who was up in the bomb bay. So we were stronger then than we've ever been in our lives. I mean, it was nothing putting putting 100 pounds up over your
All
head.
right.
Wow. That's
That's
amazing.
great. That's great.
Jim, a little bit about you?
Well, I don't think I'll ever forget the day I got my draft notice. It was the 1965 blackout of the Northeast, November 9th. And I got home that night, and my mother said, "You have a letter." And so I was told to report, of all days, December 21st. Only the military would do that. And went to Fort Dix. I actually changed from draftee to enlisted to get an electronics course, which served me well after I got out of the service. So I got down to Fort Dix, and the first thing they said, "Who wants a 3-day pass?" Because they didn't want to be there over Christmas either. And we all looked at each other and said, "What's a 3-day pass?" You know. So I was able to get back home, but by the time you made the trip by bus and cab and everything, the 3 days, you got 1 day at home. But I grew up in a small town, similar probably what the Hopewell Junction was back in the 50s and 60s, and there were 5 of us that were drafted out of that little town the same day. Wow. And we all had to report the same day. One gentleman actually ended up in basic training with me in the same platoon. After basic training, I got married, which was planned, and thinking that my wife would be able to go with me if they sent me to Germany or something like that. But after my training at Fort Monmouth, my next assignment was Vietnam, so she couldn't go anyway. But my first year was all in New Jersey. 2 months at Fort Dix, 8.5 months at Fort Monmouth with some leave time in between. Everything seemed to happen in December. I was drafted in December. I went to Vietnam in December. I came back from Vietnam in December, and when I got back from Vietnam, I had a year left. I went to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, where my first daughter was born, and I got out of the service in December of '68. So Decembers were good and bad for me.
Wow.
Wow. So any stories you remember about going over there to Vietnam?
Well, I was a cryptographic repairman and electronics, so the equipment, crypto equipment, wasn't sent out with anything smaller than a company size force. So most of the time I was on a fairly good sized base until a piece of equipment broke and you'd have to go out and help get set up. So one evening I was called to go out to another location, Song Bay, and they flew me as the only passenger by helicopter up to Song Bay with my little toolbox, which was like a fishing tackle box, and 2 pieces of equipment, and a .45 because I couldn't carry my rifle and all that equipment. They dropped me off, I fixed up the equipment, and the next day flew back down to the main base. But that was an interesting experience. Flew in helicopter several times. The first time was pretty exciting because they don't have a seat belt like a car seat belt. And I hope I got this thing on because when he took off and he wants to go that way, he goes like that. I look to my left, I'm looking at the ground. So,
Hold on.
hoping that that seat belt was on. So like I say, most of my service time was in Vietnam, was on a major base and transferred out to a couple of small bases just to fix things, and then back to security of a big base. So they didn't tend to mess with us too much, except mortar attacks and a few aggravation, small arm fires around the perimeter, but they weren't going to overrun a base that size, so I consider myself lucky. The training I got in the service led me to have a decent job, and for only spending 3 years in the service, I felt that it's had a big impact on my life and who I am, for whatever reason, so.
Well,
That's
good for you.
great.
That's awesome.
And did your friend that was in your hometown that you served with, did he serve with you through?
No, after basic training, I found out years later that he ended up as a cook in an officer's mess. So he wasn't a cook by trade or anything before he went into service, but one thing led to another, and but his brother, who also served, ended up going to Vietnam, but he didn't himself. So, and his last name was Rickard. So Reynolds and Rickard, they had us kind of tied alphabetically together.
Right. Right, thank you.
Vinny.
Vinny.
Richards.
I'm Vinny Richards. My time was from 1968. I too was drafted. I was in my senior year at Sherwood Conservatory of Music in Chicago, and I didn't do too well on piano. I was on scholarship. So my scholarship was about to be dropped, and I received a notice from my draft board that to come down to Whitehall Street. I was in Chicago. I had to fly back down to Whitehall Street and to go before a federal appeals board. I had 6 months to graduate. And I went before the board, and as soon as I walked in, they were all shaking their heads, saying, you can play trumpet in the Army. So I, 6 months to go. I said, give me 6 months. They said, no, you're going now. So I went and I auditioned at Fort Wadsworth. If you score over a 91 on the audition, you don't have to go to the Navy School of Music. Navy School of Music, the Army attachment, you go until you reach a certain proficiency, and then they send you out to an Army band. And then in that time when you're at the school, they teach you the basics of marching band, you know, with the stick and in the right and the left turns. I didn't learn that in the conservatory. So in the band that I was assigned to at Fort Knox, I double-timed around the band as the band was doing their band practice every day until I learned how to use the mace and what the mace was used for, and my right and left turns, and reading music at the same time. So it was very hard just going directly into a band. I had a choice, either Fort Knox, Fort Schofield in Hawaii, or the waiting list for West Point. And I said, no, I've been away from my girlfriend who waited for me to nearly finish college to be assigned to Hawaii or one of the other posts, so I took Fort Knox. Okay. We put off being married for 3 years. She waited 4 years while I was at college. And 2 days later, after my discharge, I finally got married. But my job in the band was a musician. And until you reach the rank of E5, sergeant, a trumpet player every second month has to go away and that band had to go away for 30 days playing taps at military funerals. I covered 4 states, Pennsylvania, I covered Ohio, Kentucky, and part of West Virginia. Once in a while, we got a call from Indiana, but we were on the road for 30 days, every day another hotel, and you lived out of 3 vans. Wow. I did that every second month. Then you'd come back to the band on the alternating month, and you spent 30 days doing band ceremonies, and we did a lot of recruiting ceremonies, okay? I have to say that the recruiters were very active and jumping on the stage after a concert and said, "How'd you like to swing an axe like that?" You know? And many people ran up to the stage to sign up, but they didn't know that you had to receive over 70, 75 to go to the School of Music, or you became what they called an alligator, which was an infantryman. So a lot of lies were told at that time, but we did all right. I had a few high priority funerals that I played taps for. I played taps for the first woman nurse to die in Vietnam, and I played taps for the first woman general to die in Vietnam. And almost every month, there was a meeting in a day room where you lined up, and they read off what they called was orders to other bands that you were going to go to, okay? So every month, we lined up, and you were told where you were going. 3 times I came on levee for Vietnam, and I went on jungle training. They sent you out for jungle training, and which was a quick review of what to expect when you get to Vietnam. The 3rd time I went for this jungle training, they told me, "Go back to your unit. You have less than a year to go. We can't send you." So I went back to the band, and I ETS'd out of the 113th Army Band. I was with the 158th Army Band, and it became inactive. And then it went to the 113th Army Band, which is special because it was General Custer's band. Before General Custer met his Waterloo at when the whole regiment was wiped out, he sent the band back. He said he was going to told the musicians that it's not their fight, and sent the band back. So the 113th Army Band has the reputation of being the 2nd oldest Army band. Could first be in West Point. And the 113th Army Band was very good duty. You know, like playing for the general, playing for the ceremonies, playing for the armor. It was at Fort Knox, so everything was armor, their classes, their graduations, and ceremonies. I did that from 1968 to 1971. I wanted to go back in when I got out, and my wife said no. So we compromised. I joined the reserves. I joined the 319th Army Band, Fort Totten, which I spent 35 years in. Wow. After my 3 years at Fort Knox. When I first got out, I threw the trumpet down, never wanted to touch it again. And after a little while, I picked the trumpet up and said, "I'm going back." My wife said, "No, you're not." So I joined the reserves. That unit, you had to die in that to get out of it. No, everybody was happy it was the only reserve band in New York City. We played for everything that the mayor wanted or the governor wanted, and they were high-profile performances. And it became my whole life. In 2005, I finally received my discharge. And from then on, we finally moved to Hopewell, and I went to the fire department in Hopewell. I said, I want to start a band or a drum and bugle corps, and they said no. You had to know 3 people in the fire company before they'd let me join. So I said, the heck with that. I'll go to the Boy Scouts. And the head of the Boy Scout, the district chairman, said, "Vinny, start a venture crew." He said, because I had a lot of girls from John Jay that wanted to be in a band, So I started a venture crew. That venture crew today is over 26 years in existence. We usually, or attempt to, do 25 concerts or ceremonies a year. Okay, at free, there's no charge, and all the people in the band, which ranges from age 14, oldest member right now is 87.
Wow.
And he's still playing parades. But I enjoy it. I pick the trumpet up. I occasionally have funerals that I play when asked through the American Legion, the VFW. And I'm an honorary member of the 42nd Division for playing taps at some of their funerals. It seems strange that the government has West Point so close and other military facilities, and to get a bugler is so hard. But I get the call and I do it. Yeah, so I'm very proud of the American Legion, the Manny Bacon post. I've been in this post 46 years. And my push recently has been for Jim Gibb. He was a POW in World War II that was a member of our post. And last year we finally got to do we did the veteran ceremony, and we honored Jim Gibb. We had a song that was dedicated to him, the POW song, and words. The Reverend Verdew of the Shenandoah Baptist Church wrote the words to the song, what you wrote a poem. And his daughter wrote and played the music to it. So we finally got to honor Jim Gibb.
He's also honored here on one of our Hometown Hero banners, too,
Yeah,
as well.
and also there's a framed picture that I gave John, that has the people from Hopewell and, East Fishkill that died in World War I and World War II, and many of the families are still here. I want to find out where that framed picture is and make sure that it's put in a place of honor. It's got to be in this building somewhere. But it lists all of the families, and most of them are still here in the area. Okay, and
Well, that's amazing. I mean, it's a great story. You had an amazing career, and thank you for your service.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was one of the lucky ones. I was in, and they consider it the Vietnam era. I'm a Vietnam era veteran, not a Vietnam veteran. And people confuse that once in a while. But I served during that time from 1968 to 71 actively, and from 71 all the way up to 2005, I did my reserve time. Yep.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vinny. And
Don
Don?
Burns,
Yes.
let's hear your story.
Oh, I don't know if I can follow Vinny's story.
I know you have a good story, because I
Well-
know one you told me that I thought was great.
I was, my family was living in the Western New York area, and I was going to college, and I was working, and I outsmarted myself. I had one class on Wednesday at 8 o'clock in the morning, and back in those days, you had IBM punch cards to change classes. And I said, I'm going to drop that class, and I'm going to pick up the same class on a different day. So you went down to the central office, and you turned the stuff in, and go back and figure I'm still got my mandatory 12 hours or more. I'm exempt from the draft. Well, about 2 weeks later, I get a notice that, yes, I dropped that class on Wednesday, and now I can work all day long, but the other class was full, and you're not in it. And about 2 weeks after that, I had a draft notice.
Wow.
My mother freaked out, and I said, well, I'm going to look at alternatives rather than being drafted. And so I ended up in the Navy. and a 6-year enlistment in electronics. And leaving Buffalo in January 9th, 1969, went to Chicago for boot camp. And being from Buffalo, at least I was prepared for snow, but I was not prepared for cold. And when we got to Chicago, everybody met at O'Hare and put us on cattle car buses to take us up to where the boot camp is, which is north of Chicago at Great Lakes. And we were met with kids coming up from the south who had on light summer jackets, and it was 14 below zero, and it was nighttime and ready to get colder overnight. So they put us in these old, I guess, World War I barracks. They're all brick and no heat as far as I could tell. Next morning it was 27 below zero, and I've got my buffalo clothing on, prepared for cold, and I'm looking at some of these kids that are in like basically like a sweater or a light jacket, and it is so cold that you're lined up from here to downtown Hopewell to get processed, and you're standing in 27 below zero weather, and that was how I joined the military. And I went through boot camp and stayed in Great Lakes for electronics A school, which was almost a year-long program if you went through the normal way. I found out that in the military there's always multiple ways of doing things. And if you listen to what they say, sometimes they're actually nice programs. I went through electronics school, what they called accelerated program, which was instead of taking 2 weeks to do a study group, you did it in 1 week. And in exchange for that, they basically gave you a pass to walk around the base pretty much anytime you wanted, as long as you maintained an 80% average. So I graduated electronics school in less time than it was required, and I graduated first in my class. Oh, wow. And that was the only time that I was ever given the choice of duty stations that I wanted to go to. I said I wanted to go to a ship that was going to Southeast Asia. A lot of my friends were over there, and so I got on a little destroyer escort, or as we call in the Navy, a tin can, and went across the Pacific, and we went to the Philippines, and then from there over to South Vietnam, and we sat in 26 feet of water off a river mouth. We had a small riverine base that had PBRs that were going up the river and looking for sandpans with contraband on it. And every night we were firing our 5-inch guns in support of that base. I guess in about 2.5 months we fired, I think it was 1,800 rounds of 5-inch shells. I can tell you exactly how much a 5-inch shells weighs, because the warhead itself is 57 pounds and the powder charge is 54 pounds. And we fired twice as many if you count the powder charge, and every one of those we would hand pass onto the ship from when we're due replenishment. And so we would sit off the coast, never touched land, and at night we would do nothing but fire. And so during the day we'd replenish. In other words, you either go out for fuel, you go out for food, or you go out for ammo, and then you come back in and anchor and shoot all night long. And after about 4 months of doing that, we had been in port for 2 days. So it was a little bit like being locked up somewhere, right, not knowing what was going on in the real world. And then they decided to send us up to Japan and give us a little reward. So we pulled into Kobe, which was a civilian port, not a military base. And they opened our ship up for tourism for the Japanese people. And it was the same time that the World's Fair was going on. So they basically said, disappear. And so we went to the World's Fair for 3 days. And then back on the ship and back down to Vietnam. And we completed the tour. Because of one of the carriers we were with at that time was the Shangri-La, which was a World War II carrier that was named after a phrase that Roosevelt used when Jimmy Doolittle surprised the Japanese by taking Army bombers off a Navy carrier and attacking Tokyo. The press had asked him, well, where did they come from? He said, Shangri-La. So the next Navy carrier was renamed the Shangri-La.
I like that.
And it was at the end of its lifetime, and we were supposed to go to Sydney with it and have a reward of looking at Australia. Instead, we went back to Japan into the shipyard because the Shangri-La no longer had one of its screws to propel through the water.
Oh.
And so the military said, we got a great deal for you. We're going to send you back to the States via the Aleutian Islands. So we went up and around into, Adak, Alaska, which is near the end of the Aleutian Islands, and down and back to San Diego where we were home ported. And I remember the day we went on our, left San Diego to go on our cruise that year was March 9th. It's my sister's birthday. So I never even got a chance to give her a call to say, oh, by the way, we're heading out now. And, but as Jim said, you remember certain dates because of, tie with something else. But when I came back, I was scheduled to go off to nuclear power school. And that was in Northern California in the San Francisco Bay Area. And we were stationed on a base called Mare Island, which at the south end was a shipyard. At the north end was where we were. And just north of us in the bay, they had, I think there were cattails or something, major plants that was growing. And they were teaching the South Vietnamese Navy how to use PBRs. So we had the South Vietnamese Navy people there. The nuclear power training was going on there, and the shipyard was there. And it's all gone now, like many bases, it's all shut down. But I had been told that we were going to go to Idaho for 6 months, and it was going to be such a great deal. You were going to have a 12-hour day, and it was a 2-hour bus ride in and a 2-hour bus ride out, and that the buses run every 4 hours. So if you missed the bus, you can add that on to your 16-hour day that you've already got.
Right.
And that, you'll love it there.
Yeah.
And I said, there's no chance that I get transferred to the East Coast. I asked the personnel people, and they said, no way. Well, about a month into the training, they came back and said, they're looking at the balance of the people on the East Coast and the West Coast, and they need about a dozen people to be shipped back to Saratoga Springs, New York. Would you like to go? So I went to Saratoga Springs instead of Idaho, which disappointed my father because he wanted to go out there and go fishing. But I didn't think the 16-hour days sounded very good. So after that, when I graduated from nuclear power school in Saratoga as a reactor operator, I was given 2 sets of orders. One was to the USS Enterprise, which is a carrier. Second set of orders was to the USS California, which was undergoing construction. It had just been launched. And I chose, if I had a choice, I told them I'd like to go to the California. Well, that's where I ended up going. And the California was down in Newport News, Virginia, and was supposed to be finished in about a year to possibly 18 months. Turned out more like 3 years later. Wow. We were finally going, and so we went down to the Caribbean and sat off the Bahama Islands for about a week and a half. Again, not going anywhere, but just looking at the islands. Mm-hmm. Right. And then pulling into Puerto Rico, into the western or eastern end of Puerto Rico was Roosevelt Roads, another Navy base. And they said, well, we're going to be here about 1 day, so you have 1/3 of 1 day to do whatever you'd like, because there's 3 duty sections.
Yeah, go.
And oh, by the way, yours starts at 8 o'clock at night. So I got to see Puerto Rico for about 3 or 4 hours before we turned around and came back. You got to see a lot of places for a little bit of time. You got to see Hawaii on the way over. I got to see Guam on the way over, Midway Island. But the only place that I really spent any time with was really in Virginia. But ended up getting out again in the winter and coming back to Buffalo and trying to complete my college, and ended up working for a company out in Western New York, and stayed there for a few years, met my wife, and then she had graduated from the University of Buffalo, and we got married. My company asked if I'd like to move to California, and I was thinking about Buffalo, Los Angeles, Buffalo, Los Angeles. So we moved to California for 25 years, and then now we're back here. We've been here for about 7 years. We actually both missed the East Coast and the small towns on the East Coast.
Right.
Love it here.
Well, I'm glad you love it here.
And the thing is that I want to mention, like Owen says, he was in a war, in the battles, or Vinny said that, he did this, he did that. The one thing is, with rare exceptions, the day you say I do and you're in, you don't have a choice of where you're going. In World War II, I had two uncles. One went to Guadalcanal and all the islands to the end. The other one went down to Brooklyn and walked around the Navy yards as a guard. And they're both World War II veterans. Military told them where they were going. They didn't have a choice. So both the American Legion and a lot of the other military organizations, just as long as you were from the era,
Right.
you were there. You didn't have a choice of where you were going to go. You could go to Vietnam immediately. You could be in the military for 6 years and not go to Vietnam at all. Same thing in World War II. You could have been stationed someplace in the States just because that's where they wanted you to be.
That was my father. My father was very lucky. He was fortunate. He was drafted for Vietnam, and he was stateside the entire time. So he was very fortunate, and he still says that today. So if you could tell that story real quickly, the one where you were, I think you were in Hawaii?
In Hawaii?
Yeah, or it was somewhere with the planes, and you thought it was...
Well, when our ship went across our little tin can, a tin can, by the way, is a destroyer escorted a destroyer, and they got that term derogatorily by the big ships. And to this day, there's still an argument which of the two meanings it is. Either it's a tin can because it's like a little tin can bouncing around on the waves, or it's because the hull is so thin that when it gets shot at, it goes right on through like a tin can getting shot. And both kind of apply. But in fact, here later this month, I'm going down to King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, to the Tin Can Sailors reunion.
Nice.
And when we were pulling into Hawaii, we were on a modern ship, and you do pass the Arizona, and you render honors to the Arizona. The next day, we're standing around, and we're watching these Japanese airplanes fly over, and these explosions in the water. And everybody's looking like, what in the heck is this? Did we have a time warp or something? We found out later they were filming the movie Tora that day. And it was all reenactment, but it was like, what is going on?
Yeah, that's pretty wild.
But it's you get a lot of crazy things you run into. I remember you were asking Jim some of the things he remembers. I remember being an electronic technician. We were in charge of the radar and the radios on board the ship, and we were in a typhoon off of Okinawa, I think, or maybe Formosa, and the ship was taking 46-degree rolls, which means that you're further over than you are up. And one of our radars went down, and another tech and myself are hauling this Hewlett-Packard oscilloscope that was about the size of a small refrigerator. It had handles on it, so it was considered portable by the military. And it weighed about 100 pounds or 150 pounds, I don't know. And we're trying to go down the passageway with this oscilloscope, and we had 1 foot on the bulkhead and 1 foot on the floor, and then up on the other side as we're wandering back and forth. And this thing is just pulling us back and forth. We finally got to the radar room with it and was trying to set it up. And everybody that day kind of had like big eyes because it was, the ship would go over and it would just kind of quiver a little bit, and then it would come back up.
Wow,
I'd like to say one quick thing. Don did a great job of telling you all that the American Legion does, and I think he missed one point that I want to make sure people understand is we put out over 600 flags on the local cemeteries every Memorial Day. We usually put them out 2 weeks before Memorial Day and take them down a week after. And that's quite an effort to walk around and identify each grave that's a veteran. Some of them obviously are marked, especially at St. Denis, but others you've got to walk around the whole cemetery, and sometimes it's half a dozen people. Sometimes we can get scouts to help us, both Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, and I wanted to let people know that that's another big thing we do that.
Thank you for that.
Important. And one last little anecdote that people in different generations have different problems. People, the men in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, have different situations than they have today. To make a phone call from home to home from Vietnam, you had to make an arrangement, and ham radio operators around the world relayed your call. I got to do that once, called halfway around the world to talk to my mother-in-law because my wife was out shopping. So,
Oh, my God.
so the one call I made that, when I was over there, she was a great lady though, but
First and last call.
there was no appointment at the other end. You had to set up with the
Hopefully
this end,
somebody
and then they hooked up. The ham radio operators all got hooked up, and when they were ready, they placed the call, and I talked to my mother-in-law.
One of the big things that I think I've seen is the reception now that veterans get. It seems far better than it was, certainly when you guys with Vietnam. Let's face it, my personal opinion, you guys got a raw deal when you came home, when a lot of the guys came home, and it wasn't right. And I've certainly have seen a change in that. I don't know about the rest of you, but it's like myself and Councilman D'Alessandro and our entire board actually, and the town, the way the town has reacted to this Hometown Heroes project, it's great. And we love it that you guys are there and that you're part of our community, and to tell our community all of the things that you do, it's remarkable. And you know, it's great to have you here. We're very happy.
The welcome home, yes, was missing. Personally, I landed in Oakland, California late at night. They processed me through in the dark. I got on a plane and landed at JFK at 6 in the morning. Took off my uniform for 30 days until I had to report to Fort Huachuca. So the spitting on the vets that were returning and stuff didn't happen to me. I basically transferred in the middle of the night.
Right.
And then for the next year, I was in Fort Huachuca, which was obviously a military base, and the town outside of it, Sierra Vista, existed because of the fort. So they treated us fairly well. They may have charged us top dollar for something when we wanted it, but they appreciated the post there. So one of the first times I heard somebody say to the Vietnam veterans, welcome home, was at a Girl Scout ceremony that was held here probably 20 years ago, and Pat Manning was speaking, and I don't care about anybody's political aspirations, but he's the first guy that stood up there and looked us in the eye and thanked us. And it did mean something, and it means something today. And I think that the returning vets today appreciate what we went through, and I think that people recognize that and we both belong to the Vietnam Veterans of America, and twice in the last 2 years, people have bought breakfast for us at a local diner that we go to, and they bought breakfast for 10 or 12 guys, however many were there. They saw us, and when we got ready to pay our bill, somebody had already paid the bill for us. So things have come around, and
They have. I think it's evident.
Yeah, a couple things I'd like to add too. A couple things I forgot is that the American Legion came about at the end of World War I because at that time, pretty much when your time was up with the military, you got a pat on the back and got told, there's the door, and you went home. And there was no prepping, to turn you back into civilian. There was no real process to make sure that you were healthy, that you didn't have shell shock, as they called it then. You just went home and picked up wherever you left off. The Legion recognized that problem, and that's part of the major reason why it was founded back in 1919, was because of the way the military was just letting people out. At the end of World War II, the American Legion created the GI Bill basically and said to Congress, we'd like you to sign this. And that's what created the GI Bill that everybody talks about, was because of the veterans looking after other veterans. And we still have this problem today, as everybody hears about the VA system and the problems in it. Our local Castle Point supposedly is one of the better ones in the system, so we don't have a real major problem here. But there's problems like myself. I was in the war zone. I did not have, as the VA calls it, boots on the ground. And because of that, they tell me that I did not have Agent Orange on me, even though that I personally stood on watch and watched the crop dusters come over and spray our ship down and continue back over to jungle and repeat this over and over again. The people in the VA say, you weren't there, you didn't do it. You were in the blue water Navy. Yeah. And we were out at sea and we were taking a cruise or something. Our ship had 5-inch 38 guns, which have a range of about almost 10 miles. So if we were out 10 miles to sea, we couldn't hit anything. So we were as close as we could get without hitting bottom. And we were definitely in brown water, but it wasn't in the river, or it wasn't someplace where we were considered on shore. And the way the VA treats it is, if I was transferred to my ship and it was already over there, and I flew into Da Nang Harbor, and I got off the plane and I walked 4 steps, well actually 1 step, on the tarmac, got on a helicopter and they flew me out to my ship, I would have boots on the ground and I'd be covered. Another situation, as people put it, a ship would pull into Da Nang, a line handler would get off and get on the pier, get a rope handed to him from a person on the ship. The man on the pier had boots on the ground. He is covered. The man handing him the rope on the ship is not covered. And that's ongoing to this day. So I also belong to the Blue Water Navy organization, which has been fighting for years and years to get us recognized. The Australians who sent ships there realized that this Agent Orange was not just staying on the ground, it was coming out the rivers. And the Navy makes their fresh water out of salt water by boiling it. And they realized, they did a study and said that the Agent Orange in the salt water is actually being concentrated in the fresh water. And we drink that. And yet the VA says we don't have that problem. It goes on and on. The young men that went to Iraq who have diseases and stuff that the VA says, no, it's not possible. It's ongoing. And we need the Legion, we need the VFW, we need the Vietnam Veterans of America, the Blue Water Navy to fight to get us what is owed us. But the Veterans Administration has other agendas, I think, sometimes. And that's why we need support from the communities. That's why getting support from you guys is so important. It sometimes sounds petty when you talk about some of these things, but if you look at the problems like with Agent Orange, what it causes, and the people who have died from it. Today there's people that are coming back from Afghanistan that have had 4 or 5 tours of duty that they need help. Right. Because they're just emotionally worn out. It's not something that's going to go away. These guys have got to readjust back to civilian life, and there's not a lot there to help them. That's why we want them to contact the American Legion, contact your VFW. You know, if you're back recently, we can't find out who you are because the Freedom of Information doesn't allow us. But if you're out there and if you listen to this and you need help, contact somebody. We want to help you. And I think that's important, as it's an ongoing battle with this. You know, it's kind of rough if you're in warfare one day, and like Jim says, the next day he's back in Oakland. You know, you got to adjust. And, you know, a lot of the troops in World War II, they came back on a ship, and it took them maybe 3 or 4 months to get the ship before they got on it, and then a month coming back, and then they got out processed. They had time to decompress.
Right.
So today it's, you know, jet over, jet back, and there you are. You know, there's the door. Here's your DD-214, and you know, tell us if you need anything.
Right.
And so we appreciate what this community's done for us, and the recognition with the banners is, you know, fabulous. And I know you've got somebody go all the way back to the Revolutionary War that you've got a banner
Yes,
for.
Jacob Griffin, yes, that's our oldest one, with a picture too, surprisingly enough. That was great.
And I think that, you know, sometimes the messages get lost. And that's why Councilman Franco and I wanted to have this as maybe one of our first of many to get the veterans in here to discuss, tell us about your stories, because the young people today, they don't hear it. They don't hear any of it. And it's important that it doesn't get lost, that they hear these messages, that they know the things that you went through and are continue to going through, and that we need to help each other as a community. And that's the only way to really do it, isn't it?
You know, the last 2 years, John Jay High School has gotten us involved in a Memorial Day service before Memorial Day, because the kids are usually off that Friday and Monday. But they invite us over to raise the flag that day, and I give them credit for getting the kids involved. And usually there's a couple of kids that will sing a couple of songs while we're there. The whole thing takes maybe 10 or 15 minutes, but we're waiting there, and when the children get off the bus, most of them gather around the flagpole. It's their option. They can go directly into class, or they can gather around the flagpole. And I'm happy to say a lot of them gather around the flagpole and take part in this situation. So we appreciate that. One way to get the word out to the children and understand it, because you know, there used to be millions of men and women serving. Now there's hundreds of thousands. So kids today, 15, 16, 17, their parents may have never served, their grandparents may have never served. Maybe their great-grandparents served in World War II, but so many of them are removed from direct access or influence of the military. So, thank you.
All right, thank you guys.
Thank you.
You all. And when we want you to come around, and we appreciate all the ceremonies that you do. Not only do you do Memorial Day, 9/11 ceremony, Veterans Day, the list goes on and on.
Yeah,
The band,
it does.
everything. It's
Day.
tremendous.
Flag Day, that's right.
And we are, yeah, Flag Day. It's we're really blessed to have such a strong veterans community, and
And a great community in general that really respects you guys, so it's great.
and hopefully we can you can encourage more of your other fellow American Legion guys to come in here, and
We could do this
and-
more
and
often.
ladies
The
to-
shy ones.
Yeah.
Well, we have,
First, tough to be the guinea pig.
yeah.
Right.
Well, we have several more banners that'll be coming up probably within a week or two, and our first female too. So we're excited about that.
That's good.
Good, good.
So we're getting up there. It's been very popular. So thank you all for taking
Yeah,
part of that.
thank you all, and thank you all for coming, and we appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Can I just say that when I got out, I took advantage of the GI Bill. I finally got my bachelor's, and then I got my master's. So I was very appreciative of the military for getting me through with a bachelor's and a master's degree.
That's fantastic.
I did the same thing.
Yep.
Didn't get a master's, but had
Good for
my
you.
BA anyway.
I was denied first in '68 that you can play trumpet in the Army. I had 6 months to go, and they said nope.
But you got it in the end,
I
right?
got it in the end, and
Good.
I got a
Good for you.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.